Imagine a world where the name of one man could strike fear deep into the bones of entire nations. A name so powerful that when whispered in the streets people shivered, knowing death and destruction would follow. That man was Genghis Khan, the relentless conqueror who built the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. His warriors swept across Asia, like a storm devouring kingdoms, and leaving behind nothing but ashes and silence. But it was not only the soldiers who paid the price of his wrath. The families of his enemies, especially the wives of defeated rulers and warriors, suffered a fate so cruel that even today it haunts the pages of history. You see battles end with victory or defeat, but the scars of what follows often run deeper than the battlefield. When Genghis Khan captured a city, its gates burned and its rulers fell. He turned his gaze to those left behind. The women of the vanquished became symbols of power, trophies of humiliation, reminders to all who dared resist his empire. They were not simply taken as spoils of war. Their suffering became part of his strategy, a weapon more terrifying than the blade. The fate of these women was whispered across kingdoms, striking terror long before his armies arrived. Their pain was used to break spirits, to crush entire dynasties before a single arrow was loosed. And so the legend of Genghis Khan grew not just as a warrior who conquered with fire and sword, but as a man whose cruelty reached into the most intimate corners of life. A conqueror who believed that destroying a man was not complete until he had shattered the dignity of his family. What he did to the wives of his enemies is darker than any tale of battlefield slaughter. And as we step into this grim story, you will uncover truths that are almost too chilling to believe. To understand the cruelty that unfolded under Genghis Khan, we must step back into the harsh landscape of the 12th and 13th centuries, a time when survival was a constant struggle and entire clans lived or died by the strength of their warriors. Genghis Khan, born as Temujin, rose from a childhood of betrayal and hardship. Abandoned by allies, hunted by rivals, and raised in the unforgiving steppes, he learned that trust was fragile and power was the only shield against death. These lessons forged him into a man of ruthless determination, a leader who believed mercy was weakness and fear was the sharpest weapon of all. The Mongol Empire did not rise by chance. It was built on disciplined strategy and an unshakable vision. Temujin united the scattered Mongol tribes under his banner, turning them into a war machine that could strike faster and harder than any kingdom of his time. His cavalry could move across vast distances in days. His soldiers lived off the land, and his tactics shattered armies twice their size. But alongside this brilliance was an unyielding cruelty. He believed that total domination required not only killing his enemies, but erasing their legacy, humiliating their memory, and seizing what they held most precious. In the medieval world, women were often treated as property exchanged in alliances or taken in conquest. But under Genghis Khan, this practice was intensified. To a horrifying degree, he weaponized the fate of women, making their suffering part of his empire's propaganda. Stories of what awaited the wives of defeated rulers traveled faster than his armies, and often cities surrendered rather than face such horrors. For the Mongols, victory was not complete until it reached the households of their enemies, until even the most private bonds of love, loyalty, and family were ripped apart. It is within this brutal context that we must explore what became of the wives of his enemies. For their suffering was not random but systematic, designed to break entire peoples and to remind the world that defiance against Genghis Khan carried a cost no one was willing to pay when Genghis Khan stormed through Central Asia. His enemies did not simply die on the battlefield. Their families became part of the spoils, and the wives of rulers were taken as both symbols and possessions. One of the most infamous acts was the capture of the Khwarezmian Empire. When the Shah dared defy Genghis Khan, his entire kingdom was wiped from the map. The men were slaughtered, the cities burned, and the women, including noble wives and princesses, were dragged before the conqueror. Their humiliation was deliberate. These women who once wore crowns now became prizes for Mongol generals, or sometimes forced into Genghis Khan's own household. Their presence was not about love or companionship, but about domination and conquest. To Genghis Khan, possessing the wives of defeated rulers sent a message louder than any battlefield victory. It said that the bloodline of his enemy had been trampled and their honor erased. Entire dynasties were broken in this way. For many rulers, their greatest fear was not death, but the knowledge that their wives and daughters would suffer unspeakable fates at the hands of the conquerors. Some accounts describe noble women being forced into servitude paraded as symbols of submission, while others were taken as concubines. Their existence became living reminders of Mongol supremacy, and it was not only the noble women. Even the wives of ordinary soldiers and citizens were subjected to violence. Enslavement was widespread, and women were distributed among Mongol warriors, like spoils of war. This served two purposes. It rewarded his men, ensuring their loyalty, and it struck terror into future enemies who understood that surrender might spare lives, but resistance would bring annihilation on every level. The cries of the conquered carried far beyond the battlefield, echoing in the halls of kingdoms yet to face the Mongol horde. Perhaps the most chilling aspect was how methodical it all was. This was not chaos, born of war, but a calculated system. Women were treated as tools of power. Their humiliation ensured that entire populations would remember the cost of resistance for generations. This legacy outlived the battles themselves, planting fear so deep that some rulers chose to bow before Genghis Khan rather than risk their families enduring the horrors others had faced. Imagine the silence in the royal chambers when news spread that the enemy had not only killed the king, but taken his queen as a trophy. The despair of soldiers who fought bravely only to know their families would be enslaved. The cries of mothers torn from their children, forced into a life of servitude. These are the human costs hidden beneath the statistics of conquest. Behind every victory claimed by the Mongol Empire lay thousands of broken families, women stripped of dignity, and children left in shadows of grief. The emotional impact was devastating. Entire cultures carried scars not only of defeat, but of dishonor. In many societies, the violation of women was seen as worse than death itself. It meant the destruction of lineage, the corruption of bloodlines, and the collapse of identity. To be conquered by Genghis Khan was not just to lose land and lives, but to watch helplessly as the very fabric of one's family and heritage unraveled. The psychological torment stretched far beyond the battlefield, turning survivors into ghosts of themselves. For the women themselves, the pain was beyond words. Torn from their homes, stripped of their identities and used as pawns. In a game of domination, they lived in a prison without walls. Their voices are rarely heard in history, overshadowed by tales of battles and conquests. Yet if their cries could echo across time, they would tell us that the true horror of Genghis Khan's campaigns was not only in the rivers of blood spilled on the battlefield, but in the silent tears of women who endured fates worse than death. This emotional devastation served Genghis Khan's goals perfectly. He did not simply destroy armies, he destroyed hope. He instilled fear so deep that long after his soldiers left the ruins, the memory of suffering remained, a reminder that to defy him was to invite not just death, but a legacy of shame and torment. As we look back on this chapter of history, we must confront a truth as old as humanity itself. Power unchecked often breeds cruelty. Genghis Khan may have built an empire that reshaped the world, but the cost was measured not only in the kingdoms he destroyed, but in the suffering of the most vulnerable. The wives of his enemies bore the heaviest burdens, their lives twisted into symbols of conquest, their dignity erased to satisfy the hunger for domination. Their stories, though often lost in the shadow of his military genius, remind us that true greatness cannot be built upon the broken souls of the innocent. History tells us that empires rise and fall, but the human pain they leave behind never truly fades. The fate of those women stands as a warning about the dangers of power without compassion and conquest without humanity. They remind us that behind every tale of glory and victory lies another story written in tears and silence. And perhaps that is the lesson we must carry with us today, that no matter how powerful one becomes, true strength lies not in crushing others but in protecting them, not in erasing dignity but in preserving it. As you reflect on this dark history, consider what it teaches us about the world we live in now. The thirst for power still exists, the temptation to dominate still lingers, But the stories of the past remind us that cruelty leaves scars that echo through generations. And if we are wise, we will choose a different path, one built not on fear and humiliation, but on respect and compassion. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of history. If you found this story compelling, do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more untold tales. For the past, your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of history and bring their lessons to light the end.